Can a velomobile have two wheels? Can a recumbent bike replace a velomobile? Why aren't streamlined recumbent bikes mass-produced? This is what today's issue of Everyday Velomobile is about. Hi all. This is Velodreamer. Here I talk about how to use a velomobile as daily transport. I thought of making a video about the types, or concepts, of velomobiles. Explain what they are and why there are so many varieties of these vehicles. Why do most velomobiles have three wheels? Although, recently, more and more manufacturers are starting to develop four-wheeled models. But for some reason no one makes two-wheeled velomobiles. In the process of preparing the material, it turned out that it was impossible to fit everything into one video. There was too much information. Therefore, I decided to divide the topic into three more categories, although even so, diving into technical details will have to be avoided in order to save time. Much remains behind the scenes, but these are topics for subsequent issues. So if you want to know more about alternative bikes, this channel is for you. In this episode 1 we'll talk about two-wheelers. In the next one about three-wheelers, and then about four-wheelers. The word velomobile in Europe and America refers to a three- or four-wheeled bicycle with a body. In the Russian-speaking space, almost anything that has a chair instead of a saddle is called a velomobile. In general, this type of transport is called human-powered vehicles, or HPV. Strictly speaking, a bicycle of the usual design with a saddle and a forward tilt of the body is just one of the varieties of HPV, but historically it has become the most popular. This is an interesting story, which I will definitely tell about in future issues. An alternative to a regular bicycle is a recumbent bike or ligerade. These are two names for the same thing. This is a two-wheeled bicycle, that is, you need to keep balance on it, but, instead of the usual narrow saddle, it has a comfortable seat in which a person can comfortably recline on his back. I've ridden recumbent bikes a lot, and the most common question from others is, how can this be comfortable? For some reason, people don't believe that this can be comfortable. If you've ridden a recumbent bike, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Such questions surprise me. Because if an ordinary bicycle saddle were comfortable, then such saddles would be found not only on bicycles. They would be in cars, in waiting rooms, in our furniture at home. We would sit on saddles instead of chairs, but for some reason this is usually not the case. A narrow saddle is only available on bicycles and exercise bikes. For some reason, when we want to relax, we sit on the sofa, or in a comfortable chair, or in sun loungers on the beach. For some reason, we don't rest on bicycle saddles. Although the answer is already obvious, I'll voice it anyway. Yes, it is comfortable to ride on a recumbent seat. Sometimes orthodox cyclists tell me that you just need to get used to the saddle and then your butt will stop hurting. But, in my opinion, this is similar to how yogis sleep on nails. You can get used to it, but why if there are more convenient solutions? The standard bicycle did not develop as a means of transport for every day. It was a sports equipment. It remains so today. If you want to use a bicycle as everyday transport, then a solution with a narrow saddle is not always optimal. There are actually several benefits. The first is the opportunity to relax those parts of the body that are not involved in pedaling. The seat supports your back, and your hands rest freely on the handlebar. Also, many recumbent bikes have a headrest, so you can relax your neck if you're riding on a good road. On a regular bike you are forced to keep your entire body tense. In addition to your legs, your arms and neck get tired, especially on sports bikes, and if you have back problems, then riding on a regular saddle becomes real torture. Maintaining your strength is very important on long trips, not when you need to show a sporting result. but when you just need to get to your destination and enjoy the ride at the same time. Of course, bicycle saddle manufacturers will try to tell you that you need to buy an expensive saddle from their company. But even in this case, when touring on a bicycle, it is recommended to make periodic stops to give the loaded areas in the lower part of the pelvis a break from constant compression. The second advantage of a recumbent bike is improved aerodynamics. Air resistance accounts for a significant portion of the energy expenditure of cycling. The position of a person on a recumbent bicycle not only reduces the frontal area, but also improves the flow pattern by lengthening the side profile. So, how exactly is energy lost while the bike is moving? It is mainly spent on the movement of something else, as well as on heating. In general, air resistance occurs due to the fact that when a bicycle moves, it moves the surrounding air along with it. Aerodynamic drag increases cubed in proportion to speed, precisely because we are dealing with volume in space. The smaller the volume of air we move in front of us and carry with us, the less energy we spend on it. Of course, recumbent bikes are also different. The most effective are low recumbent bikes, the so-called low racers. They have the profile of a person superimposed on the profile of a bicycle, and this reduces air resistance and also reduces the impact of wind, since wind speed is lower near the ground. But they are not always convenient for riding around the city or on rough terrain. Without going into details, in general, a recumbent bike allows you to ride more economically, that is, it uses your efforts more efficiently. I'm preparing a separate detailed video about aerodynamics specifically. In addition to saving energy, a recumbent bike gives you an excellent view from a comfortable position. It's like lying on a sun lounger and looking at the sea. On a regular bike it's easy to look down, but looking forward is more difficult and you have to arch your neck, especially on a racing bike. Well, it's generally difficult to look up. Athletes don't need this. But I guess you've heard of cases where someone on a racing bike crashed into a truck parked on the side of the road? This is because on a racing bike, to get into the fastest position possible, you need to lean forward with your face pointing down. Not the best position to enjoy the views while hiking. In addition, a recumbent bike is also safer. Even if you fall, falling while moving your feet forward is still better than flying headfirst over the handlebars. Additionally, recumbent bikes are usually lower than standard bikes, so you will fall from a lower height. Personally, I never dreamed of building recumbent bikes. I dreamed of a velomobile and started building it. I liked the idea of fully autonomous transport. When I learned about velomobiles from Soviet magazines, I was under the false impression that building a velomobile was easy. Moreover, it seemed to me that it was possible to build a machine the size of a car, and it would be easy and simple to ride. This is partly due to an incomplete understanding of physics, as well as some publications where some people describe imaginary rides on velomobiles. They say, you sit in a chair, close the big transparent cap, barely touch the pedals and easily reach 50 kilometers per hour. The vehicle obeys the steering wheel. Villages, forests, and fields rush past you. You make almost no effort. And all this under the barely audible rustle of a chain drive. I also thought that at the same time I could carry large loads on the velomobile and even ride with 3 people. In fact, I dreamed more about how I would route the wiring and switches inside the cabin, where to place the mirrors and armrests. As far as I see, most novice bike builders suffer from this. It is quite possible to create a velomobile on which you can have a speed of 50 kilometers per hour without a motor. But, it must be a well thought out, high-tech and, most importantly, optimized machine. It's almost like building an airplane. Every little thing matters. Of course, at the first stage I didn't know all this and didn't want to know. I thought I was the smartest. As a result, as assembly progressed, the device became more and more complex and heavier. There were more and more parts in it, and to correct the jams I did not redo it, but on the contrary, I added even more elements. In the end, I even built it. I don't even know how much this mastodon weighed. After the first time I left the village, I realized that this was a failure. Although it moved, it was heavy and cumbersome. In addition, it turned out that most trips are planned alone, sometimes with 2, and almost never with 3. And I understood all this even before I even started sheeting this thing with a body. Another 20 to 30 kilograms on the body and it would have turned out to be a barn on wheels. Having been a little sad, I decided to disassemble it and build something simpler. And then I remembered about recumbent bikes, especially since at that time I was already communicating on a Velomobile forum, and there was someone building recumbent bicycles. But I first saw recumbent bike on the Discovery Channel in 2004. It was the film Off the Rails. An epic adventure. In this film, 2 young Australians travel from Siberia to China via Mongolia and on recumbent bikes. There they also described the advantages of recumbent bicycles for tourism. The film impressed me very much back then. And now, being in Western Europe, I understand why they value travel through wild places so much. And, of course, I noted that these strange bicycles must be really comfortable if they can travel such a distance, and even in such conditions. My first recumbent bike had no suspension in the beginning. It weighed 18 kilograms. I started using it to go shopping. Over time, I added suspension and a rear semi-fairing, which created a large trunk. It was much easier and more comfortable to ride than a regular bike, especially with a headwind. Of course, the wind also affects a recumbent bike, but with the same effort I could maintain a higher speed. And if you drive at the same speed, you have much more energy left. I traveled 120 kilometers a day once every 2 weeks, and on shorter trips much more often. The terrain there is hilly, so the tests were on different terrain and on different roads. After I realized that the 2-wheel design was quite suitable for long trips and also solved the problem of back and neck pain, I decided to build something really fast. Then I already knew about the races on Battle Mountain in Nevada, and I saw that speed records belonged to 2-wheeled vehicles. I also wanted to experience this feeling rushing at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour due to the strength of my own legs. I also wanted to prove to everyone that on a streamlined recumbent bike I could overtake even a champion riding a racing bike. Of course, if you ride on a flat straight line, but still. In a couple of minutes I'll tell you about my racing Streamliner. But what's more interesting is that to build that Streamliner, I had to travel for materials. I decided to build a lower recumbent bike so I could spend less time on cargo rides. The first was Traveler 1, which had a lower loading platform and a 28-inch rear wheel. I used a backpack and trunks from chainsaw cases as luggage racks. Later, using the same scheme, I built a second version, more high-tech, Traveler 2, and made more streamlined trunks from fiberglass. This bike did its job well. And when I rode without a load, it was really very fast. It was as low as the front suspension fork would allow. It was not possible to lower it any lower because the chain had to pass over the head of the fork. This recumbent bike has been successful for daily commuting and touring. I once drove 280 kilometers on it in 13 hours, returning from a hike in Bessarabia. This was my record in 2011. The route was from Odessa to Berislav, Kherson region, in the south of Ukraine. Moreover, most of the way I rode my bike at night. The trek through Bessarabia itself gave me the opportunity to compare my bicycle with other homemade bicycles. In general, tourism is a great way to discover the disadvantages and advantages of bicycles. Then we had 3 three-wheelers with us, and they always lagged behind. At that time, I thought that the 2-wheel design was more promising for everyday cycling, as well as tourist bike trips, especially on bad roads. The fact is that a recumbent bicycle, like a regular bicycle, can easily travel along narrow paths and weave between potholes in the asphalt. In addition, the peculiarity of the single-track scheme is such that road unevenness does not create side impacts. It turns out, in fact, a two-dimensional system, and all the bumps act precisely along the axis of the center of gravity. These shocks are easily absorbed by the suspension, so a recumbent bike is generally much more comfortable to ride on bad roads than a vehicle on three wheels. Maintaining balance on a recumbent bike is a little more difficult than on a regular bike. The principle is exactly the same: constant steering under the center of gravity. When turning, you let the bike lean and start moving along a radius. In this case, the centrifugal force counteracts gravity, so that the total vector from the center of gravity still remains in line with the wheels. A recumbent bike has a lower center of gravity. There is a myth that the lower the center of gravity, the easier it is to maintain balance. In fact, just the opposite. Tall recumbent bikes have a center of gravity about the same as a regular bike, so a taller recumbent bike is easier to learn, but also falls from a higher height. In addition, for those who are used to maintaining balance with their torso tilted forward, it is difficult at first to get used to tilting it backwards. In general, in all the years that I have been developing alternative bicycles, I know of only one case where a person was never able to learn to ride a recumbent bicycle. Those who have previously ridden scooters master the recumbent bike the fastest, but cyclists usually begin to master the balance after 15 to 20 minutes. Another myth about recumbent bikes is that you can't ride them on bad roads because you can't stand up on the pedals like you can on a regular bike. This is true to some extent, but you can also stand up on a recumbent bike. The fact is that the center of gravity of a recumbent bicycle is between the wheels, and if you raise your back, you will allow the bicycle to rotate under you in the longitudinal plane. The feeling of a soft ride occurs when your head does not receive sharp shocks and shaking. This is a very important point. You won't pay attention to the vibration of your feet when you drive over bumps, but if the same thing is transmitted to your head, it will be very uncomfortable. Such vibration will cause rapid fatigue. Tall recumbent bikes may have large wheels and long travel suspension. This allows you to ride these bikes on rural roads or moderate off-road conditions. I don't compare recumbent bikes to downhill bikes because I'm interested in transport capabilities. A recumbent bicycle, like a regular bicycle, can be stored in an apartment or on the balcony, transport on a train, drag upstairs, or even lift in an elevator. I am also often told that I will not be visible on the road, but there are tall recumbent bicycles in which the rider's head height is the same as that of a cyclist on a racing bike. So, for the city, you can simply use a taller recumbent bike. I developed a frame set for a recumbent bicycle for sale, that is, an assembly kit that contains all the non-standard parts, and you can choose any standard ones from the bike store. This way you can assemble a recumbent bike that is suitable exactly for your conditions, and also change the layout of the bike if you decide to switch, say, from city trips to out-of-town tourism. For the city, it is important not to be too low, but also not to be too high, so that you can easily reach the ground when stopping. And to have a comfortable luggage case in which your documents will not get wrinkled or wet. You can also add a suspension fork and additional racks for touring, or build a full racing recumbent bike on the wheels of a racing bike if you want to ride on the road. I will resume production of frame sets as soon as possible. By the way, the new versions will already be made of aluminum. Finally, back to high speeds. I was creating a racing streamliner. At the beginning, I built a long wheelbase recumbent bicycle on large 28-inch wheels with racing tires. I had to make it long so that I could fit both 28-inch wheels on the low racer. However, this scheme increased the lateral area. The wheels covered with discs should reduce aerodynamic drag, but even in this form the side wind was already beginning to interfere greatly. I put too many layers of fiberglass on the fairing. It turned out to be heavy. As it turned out, gluing fiberglass fabric is much easier than removing it from an already hardened body. In addition, the increased total surface area also forced an increase in the amount of material, which also added weight. But I planned to drive only on the plain, so I thought that this was not so important. The vehicle turned out to be very fast. I easily accelerated to 50 kilometers per hour on it, although starting and stopping required outside help. Also, crosswinds became an even bigger problem after installing the fairing. Riding this monster was a very dangerous activity. The last race ended in an accident. I tried to enter the corner at about 50. Personally, I don't remember how it was, because when I fell I received a blow and partial amnesia. But there was a camera on my helmet. The quality is terrible, but you can see something. The cameraman who was supposed to film the epic turn-in instead filmed me flying off the road. Apparently, I started to take the turn too shallowly, and the narrow road wheels ended up on the sand that strewn the side of the road. Probably if I had leaned the bike more I could have avoided hitting the sand. When played back in slow motion, it is clear that in general the trajectory was correct. My helmet broke when I hit a large rock and flew off my head immediately. The bicycle slid about 10 meters off the road before stopping. I escaped with a slight concussion, a cracked rib, a cut ear and chin. In general, it's good that I remained alive. It's very good that this video exists, because I don't remember this accident, but came to my senses about a minute after the fall. And, it would seem, this experience should have shown me well that two-wheeled streamliners are not suitable for road travel. But I was still fascinated by speed. After all, before the fall I easily reached 50. So it's possible. The next project was the Magellan Streamliner. I still rode the second Traveler, which I now realize was a really fast utility touring recumbent bike. But, I wanted to do something even faster. The new recumbent bike was initially planned to be equipped with fairings. Simulations and virtual aerodynamic tests have shown that in a completely enclosed body, this recumbent bike will have 3 times less air resistance than one without fairings. Since I already knew how impractical and dangerous a fully enclosed recumbent bike shell is, I decided to split it into 2 parts and have a soft membrane between them that would allow my feet to be on the ground when starting and stopping. But any violation of the integrity of the fairing greatly reduced its effectiveness. However, I didn't know how to build fast trikes at the time, so a split fairing was my only option. With each subsequent machine I owned, the technology became more and more advanced, but also more complex and time-consuming. Therefore, the construction of these fairings took quite a long time and cost a lot of work. The most offensive thing is that this glossy surface was destroyed during the first attempt to remove the mold. It was my mistake, because I did not know all the intricacies of the technology. But this saved me from making molds for the rear half fairing. There was simply no moral strength left for this. I decided to do it in a single copy, and this was the right step, as it turned out later. I didn't really have time to travel at home, because at that time we were moving again, and I decided to arrange a big trip from the Kherson region to central Ukraine. Unfortunately, my negative experience with racing tires on bad roads was repeated here. The roads at that time were terrible. Near the city of Kryvyi Rih I found myself in a heavy downpour, and even in the dark. On a road flooded with a good layer of water, my front wheel fell into a huge hole. The impact bent the fork and I realized that I couldn't go any further. Local enthusiasts helped me out by providing me with an overnight stay and a workshop. In the end, I fixed the bike and reached my destination the next day. But on this ride my average speed was much lower than on the Traveler. The excellent aerodynamics and racing wheels failed to live up to their potential in a real ride.
Интервью маленькое. Как вам наши дороги?
Сейчас хорошие.
Убойные, да?
Плохие там, где колеса остаются, а эти хорошие.
Давай.
I learned how to get in and out of the Streamliner, and even maneuver at low speed. But the volume of the rear semi-fairing turned out to be small, and the side area was very large. It was simply not practical. The leatherette membrane was also very uncomfortable on everyday trips. It made it difficult to quickly get out of the bike. Several times it happened that at low speed I fell and floundered for a long time before getting out of the recumbent bike lying on its side. Such situations are very dangerous if you fall on the roadway. I had to take a step back, remove the rear half fairing and install racks for hanging trunks instead. In this form, the recumbent bike has become much more practical. The front fairing partially protected from the cold, especially the feet suffered from the cold when traveling in winter. The recumbent bike was not all weather, but with a fairing it was still more comfortable for bad weather. The fairing also gave a noticeable increase in speed, while its lateral area was not too large. In this form I took part in the Odessa-Saka 2013 cycling race. Traveled 100 kilometers in 4 hours. But something else is more interesting, I got to Odessa on my own, and then also returned back. The journey to Odessa and back was as much as 1,000 kilometers. Compared to this, the 100 kilometers of the race itself were not particularly significant. But at the race I was faster than many cyclists. Overtook entire groups. Of course, the coolest athletes were twice as fast, but they also produced 4 times more power than me. The following year I tried again, but without the fairing, and my result was a full 40 minutes worse. These adventures helped me develop the understanding that with such limited power as a human has, there are no unimportant details in the design of a bicycle. You need to get rid of everything you can do without. Rolling resistance is as important as aerodynamics. But weight is just as important as the first 2 parameters. None of them can be ignored or considered unimportant. Each subsequent percentage increase in efficiency is more difficult, with a significant increase in technological sophistication and design thoughtfulness. In addition, the specific conditions of use should form the basis of the project. There's an opinion that a streamlined recumbent can still be used for everyday trips if you install retractable side wheels on it. This technique is actually used in racing. After all, a recumbent bike with a fairing has 3 times less aerodynamic drag than without a fairing. It's not surprising that some people build such machines. And they are really very fast. But, as my experience has shown, a shaky bike that you can't quickly get out of is very dangerous and susceptible to side winds. This is how, for example, a recumbent bicycle is affected by passing trucks. This effect remains even without the rear half fairing. At a speed of 20 to 30 kilometers per hour it is not scary. But at low speed, such a side gust can simply knock you over or make you jump off the edge of the road. Or, worse, end up in the middle of the road. Putting the side wheels down is also dangerous, because they have a very narrow track and are small themselves, and the asphalt surface near the curb is usually poor. The situation is even worse if an unforeseen situation arises where you need to suddenly brake. You simply won't have time to put out extra wheels. In general, I think these solutions are good for racing, but bad for everyday driving. You need to build the device according to your tasks. There's no point in putting racing wheels on gravel. Just like there is no point in having a low racer for traveling 3 kilometers a day. But, for a long trip on asphalt, a low racer will be much more convenient and efficient than a vertical fat bike. As I said before, recumbent bikes come in different varieties. So what are they? In general, by height they are divided into high racer, medium mid racer, and low racer. You can choose the height depending on your tasks. Low racers, due to their characteristics, are more suitable for racing, but it is also possible to use them for tourism if these are long-distance trips on asphalt, for example brevets. High racers allow the use of large wheels with a short wheelbase, and mid racers are the average option. According to the length of the base, they also have 3 types. Long wheelbase, when the front wheel is in front of the pedals. This way you can put a big wheel, but make the recumbent bike a low racer. Medium base, when the front wheel is next to the pedals. This is exactly what Moshe's first ever recumbent bicycle, Velorizontal, was. This scheme is also interesting for some front-wheel drive layouts. And the short wheelbase is the most popular and most compact layout. There are also not only rear-wheel drive recumbent bicycles, but also front-wheel drive ones. In turn, there are several types of front-wheel drive. The very first is the type with a movable pedal bracket. This is when the pedals in the front wheel are mounted on one structural element, and when steering, the bracket moves along with the front wheel. This design allows you to steer using your feet. Or rather, to be honest, you can't help but steer with your feet. You have to steer with your feet, and if you train well, you don't have to use your hands to steer at all. It's more difficult to learn to ride like this, but it's a very interesting feeling. In turn, the drive with a movable bracket also has varieties. The most famous is the drive designed by Mazurchak. Vladimir Mazurchak is a veteran bicycle designer from the city of Poltava in Ukraine. Almost the same option is used by the cruise bike company. The second type is the Flevo bike. The difference is that the turning point is located lower. The third type is Python. The peculiarity of the Python is that its frame seems to break, bend, approximately in the middle under the seat or even behind the seat. Personally, I don't have much experience building front-wheel drive bikes, although I have built a few custom ones. The main disadvantage of this scheme is that it is quite difficult to make the front suspension, although Flevo bike solved this problem. In the video, Sergey Muravyov from Kiev rides a replica of one of the recumbent bicycles from the Flevo bike company. Front-wheel drive recumbent bicycles with a fixed pedal bracket are available separately. Here the chain is routed along the front fork leg to the drive sprockets via ring or rollers or an intermediate gear. In this case, the chain should run along the line of rotation of the steering wheel so that the chain tension has minimal effect on steering. Sometimes the pedal bracket itself is positioned so that the chain goes directly to the driven sprockets. This type of drive is the simplest. Don't be alarmed by the chain twisting when steering. This is not a problem at all. The main disadvantage of this scheme is that it is impossible to make a front suspension here at all. When riding uphill, the rear wheel of a recumbent bike is loaded more than the front wheel. This is important when traveling over rough terrain. If a recumbent bike has front-wheel drive, then when riding uphill, its drive wheel, on the contrary, is unloaded. Because of this, slippage may occur. To avoid this, on front-wheel drive bicycles the rear wheel is placed noticeably further from the center of gravity than the front wheel, so that more weight falls on the front wheel. A huge plus of front-wheel drive is the short chain. However, front-wheel drive recumbent bicycles are actually a whole subculture, which is worth talking about in a separate video. The short summary is this: a recumbent bike is a replacement for a regular bicycle. For different types of upright bikes, there are similar types of recumbent bikes. A recumbent bike can be a city bike, a touring bike, or a racing bike. Yes, it won't be able to compete with an upright bike in downhill and similar disciplines, but they can't be called transport either. A recumbent bike is also suitable for brevets, long-distance trips on asphalt, and for all everyday trips in which you use a regular bike. At the same time, recumbent bicycles retain the main advantage of a bicycle: a feeling of freedom and openness, close interaction with the outside world. You feel the wind on your face and hear the sounds around you, see everything that is happening around. But this is exactly what we want from tourism. But, still, this is a replacement for a bicycle, but not a car. As I have seen from personal experience, in order to have truly effective aerodynamics, you need to have a completely solid body of the correct shape. And for this to be practical, the machine must have static stability. Also, an everyday vehicle must be all-weather, protected from cold, wind and rain. This is why no one makes streamlined recumbent bikes for everyday riding or touring. For now, I'll say goodbye to this. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to this channel. This will allow me to earn additional income from YouTube, and I will have more opportunities to experiment, develop and create new interesting content. Thank you for watching. See you again.